Today, Dad is doing that with Brad Grindrod, a member of a profession that many of us don't know about. Brad is a professional storyteller. Brad, tell me, what does a professional storyteller do? Is that what somebody pays you to read a book to them?
A storyteller is a storyteller. Whether it's a mom or a dad sitting beside their kid's bed telling the story of the three little pigs and the big bad wolf before tucking them in at night. Me, let's say, as a keynote speaker, telling the story of Wheelbarrow Johnny in a convention hall in front of a couple hundred businessmen. We're both storytellers. The only difference is I get paid for it. Not a lot. Sometimes it pays for my gas.
Great. You are a retired long haul truck driver, which is interesting because I've been wanting to do a show on a long haul. I thought it would be really fun to get a camera and get in a semi and document that kind of life for a while. I think that would be really interesting. But how does this relate to storytelling, Brad? Being a retired truck driver, you have a lot of stories to tell.
It gives you a lot of life experiences. I'm 69 years old, so I have a lot to draw on. I've seen the whole country. Remember the Johnny Cash song, I've been everywhere, man? Well, I have been everywhere, man. Every city, every state, every place in the United States over 25 years of driving across country, moving families into some of the craziest places and cities all over the country and southern Canada from coast to coast. So I've seen the South, I've seen the North and the Northwest and the people and different attitudes and places and environments. So that has also given me a lot of insight to kind of shade and color my stories and the stories I tell.
When you're having a festival online, I imagine it works easier because one person's speaking at a time. But if it's a real live festival, wouldn't you have multiple events at once, and wouldn't everybody be telling stories over each other?
A Zoom festival, of course, is relatively easy to put on in that you don't have to go to the trouble and expense of, let's say, renting a venue or something of that nature and then having to fret about selling enough tickets to make ends meet. And the other positive thing about these Zoom and the virtual storytelling shows is that I can put on a show from my home here in Tacoma, and the other storytellers can do the same. And yet we can reach audience members, live audience members in remote geographic locations. We've had audience members in the shows that Larry and I have done from as far away as New York, Singapore, and even Zimbabwe, which is quite amazing. Storytelling is best served in person, I should say, live and in person. And these festivals, they'll go on over a weekend, sometimes over a whole week, in that they are produced just like any other type of show. You were talking about Renaissance fairs earlier. A storytelling festival is produced in much the same way, although you will have different venues. A good example is the Seattle Folklife Festival. The festivals that we do put on here in the Puget Sound region are structured basically like that. They will have different venues. You might have a workshop going on over here, and maybe you have a Native American like Carol telling Indian legends over here. Maybe you might have, when I put on shows, particularly if I put on shows for a service club or a business club at a luncheon, they'll look up on our website and they'll hire me for an hour to put on a show in the meeting as the entertainment. And many of these people have never seen a professional storyteller. And there's a very famous quote by a man named Brad Grindrod, who said, if you've never seen a story told by a professional storyteller, you don't know what you're missing. If you have, you'll never forget it. And these people are amazed at that our art is even around anymore. I mean, traditional storytelling has been around forever. And before we had media, TV, and computers, and even movies, storytelling was the main form of entertainment, of course, along with music. And the art kind of got lost for a little bit, but it's making a comeback. And when these people hear an hour show of traditional stories, traditional folk tales and fairy tales from all over the world, they are absolutely mesmerized that this type of art, this type of entertainment even exists anymore. Especially for some of the older audiences who remember the old time, sitting at home before they had TV. They might have been sitting around the radio listening to the old time radio story shows. They were just,
War of the Worlds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
that was a funny one.
That was a golden age of storytelling in that type of genre, which is,
I really love old time radio.
I do too.
I do. The only reason I don't listen to it more is because the quality is so bad. It's really hard for me to tolerate listening to, and I can't understand it very well, even with my hearing aids.
Mm-hmm.
I really do like the art, that style of delivering stories.
Even in the early days of television, they were telling stories almost in the old-fashioned way, with the placards on the screen telling what was going on with the various scenes. So even in the early days, it was done in quite the same way. But there's nothing. Go ahead.
I think it's a lot more powerful to tell a story the old-fashioned way, describing a backdrop. It will enhance the story in a lot of ways.
The goal of the storyteller is to be able to evoke these scenes in your own mind so that you are actually living this story vicariously through my telling of it. I don't just narrate a story. I tell it. I like movies. I'll give you a scene. I'll go from scene to scene to scene and get you into that scene and develop the story just scene by scene by scene instead of just telling you what's going on, and let you in your own mind envision that story, putting yourself into that story. And a successful story, if it's told the right way, that's the outcome that it will engender.
What type of stories do you like to tell? Do you tell any creepypasta?
I do. Halloween is one of my favorite times of year. I'm a traditional storyteller. I tell all kinds of stories, but one of my main types of stories that I tell are folk tales, traditional folk tales, and traditional fairy tales from all over the world. And my favorite are ghost stories, witches and werewolves and goblins and all manner of macabre and devilish things. Halloween time is a big time for me. I put on shows. I tell stories.
My favorite holiday.
Almost every week, every couple, 3 times a week during Halloween. Yeah, my too. And they're my favorite to tell as well. They're just a blast.
Every year at our Toastmasters Club, since I've been a member, we've done scary stories at Halloween, and I always give one, and I really, really love it. This past year, I wrote a story that I based on an experience I actually had in the Philippines at a cemetery. It was so fun.
I remember it.
Yeah.
That's the other sign of a good story told, is that your audience doesn't forget it.
It makes me feel good that you remember it.
I do.
Because that means that it was memorable. And if you tell a story and nobody remembers it, there's really no point in telling it at all, except for that few minutes of attention you get.
Yep.
How does one go about becoming a storyteller? I'm sure there's no clown college for storytellers.
Interestingly, there is. You can actually major in storytelling. Now, interestingly enough, many of the storytellers come from the academic field. History professors, drama professors, literature professors. Some of the big name storytellers these days, people like Odds Bodkin, are literature professors. And some of the storytellers that I know that perhaps aren't really well known to the public, but do a lot of storytelling work, have actually they have gotten degrees in ancient literature, let's say, or even English literature. And the storytelling, especially if you're taking a lot of like Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Norse mythology, where so many of these stories come from, the Celtic mythology of England and Ireland and Scotland. This is where the stories evolve from. So many of these academics, they get into storytelling, and many of them are academics. Me being a retired truck driver, I have no idea how I guess I broke the mold on that.
Would a professional storyteller be one who might speak at a business event, a story that is written and designed to communicate a specific message to the company, to the employees? Okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Speech.
I told the story that I told you about the Wheelbarrow Johnny earlier, which I have told in front of a number of business groups, specifically as a keynote speaker. And the story of Wheelbarrow Johnny, it's quite interesting. It's about the early life of John Studebaker, who, along with his 2 older brothers, Clem and Henry, were the founders of the Studebaker Automobile Company, who produced their first gas-powered car way back in 1901. And in this story, John Studebaker, who was the youngest of the 3 brothers, when he turned 19, he decided he was going to leave the family. They were building farm implements, farm wagons back in Indiana, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in the early days before the Civil War. And John decided that he was going to leave the business and seek his fortune out in California as a gold miner. This was in the early 1850s during the California Gold Rush. So he and his brothers built himself what they call a prairie schooner, which is the type of wagon that would head out on the Oregon Trail, go out to the West Coast. And he signed on to a wagon train. But when he got to California, instead of going into the gold fields, he hired on in a blacksmith shop, where he came up with the idea of building a rugged, reliable wheelbarrow, something miners didn't have and desperately needed, which he sold for $10 each. And these wheelbarrows were so popular, and he sold so many of them, that it wasn't long before he earned the nickname of Wheelbarrow Johnny around Placerville in the gold fields in Northern California. But unfortunately, after a couple of years, the blacksmith shop burned down. Matter of fact, after the second fire, which burned down the whole downtown of Placerville, he and his partner decided not to rebuild. So John took his savings, his life savings, $8,000, which he managed to save in California, and returned to Indiana, invested that money into the brothers' wagon business, where he eventually led that company into becoming the Studebaker Automobile Company. And I've told that story many times, businessmen, and especially to older members of various types of clubs. And it's really a favorite of my older audiences because many of them owned Studebakers back in the day. And in fact, I remember one old gentleman came up to me after a show I did, and he was talking about, he remembered the Studebaker wagons when he was a child, back in his family's farm, back in the Midwest. He remembered the Studebaker brand, the emblem on the farm implements back then on the wagons, which is just absolutely phenomenal. So it's stories like that, along with a business type of a message, which will be inspirational that I would tell to business groups and have told to business groups. I am not a necessarily keynote speaker, but I have done it, and I accept those invitations when I get them. Usually it comes down to having a little, they pay me a little bit of money and per diem, and I get a free chicken dinner out of it.
All right. I'm introducing a new segment, and it's called Show and Tell. Can you pick an item in the room that you're in and tell me the story behind it?
Over here to my right, your left, is a growing operation, not marijuana. Although it would be, no, I guess it isn't illegal. It's still illegal around here.
Are you able to pick this object up?
No, I can't.
Okay.
Maybe I can show it to you.
Oh, there we go.
Over
there. Okay.
I don't know. I grow, and I have for many years now, I grow sprouts.
What is it?
Sprouts. Broccoli sprouts, which are really, really healthy for you. And so I've set up this growing operation that is automatic. I went out and I bought valves and actually sprinkler timers and everything else, and I can buy sprouting seeds, broccoli seeds online. And so I grow broccoli sprouts, which I put into my smoothie every morning as there's half of my greens for the day. I've been doing this for years. So that's something that not everybody does. So that's my growing operation, growing broccoli sprouts. All automatic, except I put the seeds in, and the watering is done on a schedule, on an automatic timer. I don't have to mess with it. I just pull a tray of seeds out, put it in my smoothie in the morning, and put some more seeds back in there, and off she goes. I've been doing that for 4 or 5 years now.
Wow, cool. Is it hydroponic?
Hydroponic. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. That sounds like fun. Brad, how are you a waste of time?
How am I a waste of time? My wife is over here. She's laughing. How am I a waste of time? I could say that there have been times in my life where I personally might have felt that I was a waste of time, although I was earning money. When you're a young person involved in your career, you are just hustling all the time. When I retired, this is an issue that all retirees, many retirees face, as did my parents. You either have to find another occupation, another hobby, another something full-time that you can delve into, or you will deteriorate very, very quickly.
Waste away.
That's right. Interesting, when he retired, my dad was the traffic manager for the Port of LA. He was a businessman his whole life. And when he retired, he went to work for H&R Block in doing this income taxes, He's very good with numbers. And it wasn't 2 weeks when he started with H&R Block that they had him running an office. And he ran that office, I don't know, for like 15 years until the day he died. He loved work, and I love work as well. And so I have to have something engaging. This is just storytelling is a full-time occupation. You're either researching, you're writing, or you're producing all the time. It's a full-time occupation, even though I'm not making a great deal of money at it, hardly any money at it. I'm doing it because, well, I'll tell you, it's like any art. It's like acting. Most actors don't make a lot of money. We do it because we are passionate about the art and we're passionate about entertaining people.
It's like YouTube.
Just
you have
like
a YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm. So that's what keeps me going. So some people might call it a waste of time, but this puts me under time pressure as well, which is very, very good for retiring, good for me. So I really don't have a lot of time to waste. And I think that's the best thing for me, because you know what they say, an idle mind is the devil's playhouse, or is that idle hands? I can't remember.
I don't know. Maybe the devil's playground is a fun place to play.
Perhaps it is.
Might want to give it a try.
I think I already did in my early days.
Well, if you were standing outside the pearly gates and God asked you, why should I let you in?
Why should you let me in? Lucky I'm a storyteller, because there's a story that I tell at Halloween time. Well, it's just called Wicked John. Wicked John is a blacksmith back in Appalachia, and he is the meanest, nastiest, most wicked person you could ever meet. And he's so bad that St. Peter and all of his angels that clerk for him up in heaven, he's so bad and treats people so bad that they can't even keep up in recording all of his bad deeds. So St. Peter comes down and he says, hey, I can't believe there's somebody that bad that's causing all this havoc with my record keepers up in heaven. And he comes down and he meets Wicked John. And they have a discourse back and forth. And St. Peter finally, he shakes his head and he goes back up into heaven. He says, Wicked John really is that bad. When the Wicked John dies, he decides that he's going to try to go up to heaven. When he knocks on the pearly gates, nobody answers. He looks over the side and he sees this little office over the side, outside the pearly gates, that says St. Peter on it. And he goes over there and he knocks on the door and he comes in. And here's St. Peter working at his desk, recording all the evil and good deeds of everybody on earth. And he says, John, what are you doing here? And John says, well, I died. He says, so I figured I'd come up to heaven. And St. Peter says, oh, no, John, you can't stay here. You have to go down there. So John says, well, okay. He walks out and he goes down and he starts going down to hell. And he's walking along and he sees the devil outside of the gates of hell. But he already had an altercation with the devil earlier in the story. But when the devil saw Mean John coming, Mean John was so mean that even the devil didn't want anything to do with him. And he rushed inside and he shut the gates to hell, and he wouldn't let John in there. When John went up and he knocked on the gates, the devil told him, no, John, you can't come in here. And he said, well, St. Peter won't let me into heaven either. What am I to do? And the devil said, well, John, he said, with your talent, you would make a good politician. He said, why don't you run for president? So John, he did. He ran for president on the independent ticket for every presidential cycle, but he never won until finally somebody said, John, you need to join an established political party. And he did. He joined an established political party, and by golly, you know what? He won election. So me, like Wicked John, I won't become a politician either. But then again, I'm not sure that either St. Peter or the devil's going to have me. I may be wandering around for all my time, being a ghost.
I think that would be a lot more fun.
Perhaps.
Can you imagine spending eternity scaring the shit out of people?
I don't know. It might get old fast. But
yeah, it would. If you're doing it forever, every day,
yeah.
Everything would get old.
Yeah.
No one wants you can't live forever. You would get bored and kill yourself eventually.
Of course, none of us really know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Yeah. You're arrested and nobody knows why. What does your family and friends think you did?
Oh, my goodness. I'll tell you a little secret. I have been arrested twice for having some illegal substances under the backseat of my car when I was a young man.
They might even be legal now.
They are. Matter of fact, they are legal now. I was an old hippie growing up in California in the 60s.
I could probably just do it right here on YouTube.
But I don't do it anymore. But interestingly, when I was driving truck, now you can't smoke marijuana, you can't do any of that any time period when you're driving truck, and I didn't. One time I took a load of the furniture from manufactured from the Shenandoah Valley. Some folks were moving. These were Canadians moving up to Red Deer, Canada. I had all of their household goods on my truck. I had also other families that were on there too. And when I got up to the Canadian border, of course, you have to go through customs and through a little border station out in the middle of nowhere at Glacier Park there into Canada. The customs officer there, the border officer there, he went through questioning me about everything. He probably hadn't seen anybody crossing the border there in a week, especially not a truck. We sat there for an hour or so while he went over checked my records on his computer. And so he called me into this office there and he said, have you ever been arrested? Kind of felt like Arlo Guthrie, with Officer Opie. And I said, no, I've never been arrested. And he says, I'm going to ask you that one more time. I said, no, I haven't been arrested. So he says, you were arrested for possession of marijuana when you were 17 years old. I said, you know what? That was when I was a minor. And as a matter of fact,
that record should be expunged.
That's right. I said, that record should be sealed and gone. And I said, how in the hell did you even find that? And he says, I have access to Interpol. Nothing ever gets off of Interpol.
That's kind of weird. Why would that be on Interpol?
I don't know, but he wasn't going to let me into Canada. I said, well, okay, you're going to have to explain then to why these people, they're all of their household goods, their furniture, their whole life is not going to arrive in Canada because of you being excuse my French, but a-hole. So he said, all right. He says, I'll tell you what. He says, I'm going to let you come in. I'm going to give you 5 days that you can come into Canada because I had to go across and come down into Washington on the way out. He says, but you can't come in until you are criminally rehabilitated. This is, again, you remember Alice's Restaurant with Arlo Guthrie and Officer Opie? This is kind of what I felt like. But it took me 10 years of going back and forth and doing everything imaginable with the Canadian government to finally get my letter of criminal rehabilitation. So now I can go into Canada, and if they say anything, I can show them my letter that said, I am criminally rehabilitated so that I can come into Canada.
I have one more question for you, Brad. Would you rather eat a bowl of crickets or a bowl of worms?
I would say, if I had to, I would eat a bowl of crickets if they were prepared properly. And the only reason I say that is because I saw on TV, I think it was in an Asian market somewhere, where they actually eat crickets. But they were prepared, they were like fried and this and that and the other thing. And he says, tastes like chicken. Well, I like chicken. So if they were prepared properly, I would say crickets. I don't think I could stomach worms.
Worms are a little bit slimy, to be honest. And crickets are actually quite nutritious. They actually have developed this product called cricket flour in Singapore, I believe. And it works just like regular wheat flour, only it's made with crickets. It is the future of food. It's so much easier to grow crickets than it is to grow fields of wheat.
I'll turn 69 years old in May. I figure I've got about 20 good years left on me, so I hope I'm gone before crickets replace a good hamburger.
Thank you, Brad. Brad, The Three Little Pigs is a classic story. Can you retell this story for us as though it were written today?
I'd like to decline that request, and I'll tell you why. The Three Little Pigs, I didn't necessarily tell The Three Little Pigs to an adult audience, and I would hesitate to tell it to a children's audience as well. There's so many better stories. But along that line, I do tell stories to children. I do tell children's shows as well. And I tell a lot of Aesop's fables, because Aesop's fables are stories that have a definite moral attached to them. Now, you can say that about the Three Little Pigs as well, but they just don't have that ring to them like Aesop's fables. And the other thing about Aesop's fables is that, they're just so appropriate for children of all ages. And I use them quite often, even when I tell to adults, as kind of interludes between longer, more involved stories. I also like to tell Bible stories, especially Old Testament stories, which I think make the very, very best stories. And Jonah and the whale, my version of Samson and Delilah are stories that I tell. But along with Bible stories, I also like to tell stories from the Hindu tradition and the Buddhist tradition, and even stories about Muhammad as well.
You
And
know what? I got to say, there are some interesting stories in those traditions. I'm thinking in particular at the moment about Mahabharata.
mm-hmm.
I really enjoy that. I've never read the entire thing. I can't. But the
I
stories
studied.
in there are quite interesting, such as the one of Dupati and her 5 husbands, because there wasn't one who had all the 5 qualities that she wanted.
Yeah. I studied comparative religions a couple of years when I was in college, and I haven't been able to get through the Mahabharata either. It's kind of like War and Peace. You might start it 50 times, you just can't get through the whole thing. I have a little story that I prepared for you tonight that kind of comes from that tradition. It's a short story, but kind of in the vein of the Aesop's Fables. It's short, one of those that I'll use as an interlude between 2 longer stories. It's a traditional Chinese folktale in which the Buddha plays a supporting role. Would you like to hear it now?
Yes, we would
Okay.
love to hear this.
Imagine the headmaster, an elder monk of the Shaolin Temple, who is instructing a group of young novices, young student monks, who are sitting around the master, the headmaster, in a semicircle out in the courtyard of the Shaolin Temple. And he asks these young monks if they'd like to hear a story. Of course, they say yes. Well then, young sirs, the headmaster begins, here is the story of the student and the monk. Many years ago, in a rural village in China, there lived a Buddhist monk who was the teacher in a village school, who, unlike the traditional image of what we would think a Buddhist monk should be, this particular monk was, well, not that. Because it turns out, you see, that he was quite fond of good food and drink, to the point that his belly had grown as big as that of the famous statue of the Laughing Buddha, who, by the way, is also said to have been a teacher. But, quite apart from the enlightened state of the Laughing Buddha, this monk will fall sound asleep after consuming a big meal, or snacks as he preferred to call them, feigning all the time that he was deep in meditation on the all-seeing Buddha. So, every day after consuming an ample breakfast, he would arrive at the school. And every day after giving the lesson, he would have his snack while the children worked in our books. And every day he would fall sound asleep until the bell rang, signaling the end of study. And every day, this same routine would be repeated. After consuming his snack, he would fall asleep, snoring peacefully until he was awakened by the bell at the end of studying. Then one day, a new student arrived at the school. His name was Li. His family had recently arrived at the village because his father was quite ill, and the village had a hospital where his father sought treatment. So Li began to attend the school. And after a week or so of witnessing this odd behavior of the teacher, one day asked him, "Teacher, may I ask you why you sleep each day while we work in our books?" Which was quite an audacious question for this young man to ask, and had it been any other student, might well have resulted in a beating. But the monk, unabashed, smiled, and without the slightest hint of anger or embarrassment, replied, "Dear boy, you are new here. I thought the other children might have told you by now that it only appears that I am asleep, when in fact, during those moments, I go to meet with the Buddha and listen to his wise words. That's why I try to sleep as much as I can, even here at the school." an explanation which didn't quite satisfy Li's curiosity. Nevertheless, he knew it was not in his best interest to question the teacher further. So he left it at that, as did the other students. Several weeks later, Li's father took a sudden turn for the worse. And Li, he stayed up all night helping his mother care for him. So that at school the next day, he was so tired that after the lesson, he could no longer keep his eyes open and fell fast asleep, and slept so deeply that he did not hear the bell, which right on cue awoke the teacher, who, when he saw the boy sleeping, grew so angry that he took Li by the ear and started screaming. "Aha! I caught you, you little rascal! How dare you fall asleep in my class?" When poor Li, startled and desperate, had a sudden flash of inspiration. "But teacher," he cried, "it only appeared that I slept, when all the time I was really with the Buddha, listening to his wise words." "Indeed," scowled the incensed monk. "And just what did the all-seeing Buddha have to say to you?" "Well," the boy hesitated as he tried to hide a wry smile that was erupting across his face. "The all-seeing Buddha told me," he said, "that never in my life have I seen your teacher."
Thank you, Brad. Deb did that with Brad Grindrod, a professional storyteller and former long-haul truck driver. And that's another story for another day that I would love to do. Thank you, Brad.
You're quite welcome. It's my pleasure.